Hi, Grade 4. Today you're going to be listening to Chapter 16 of The People of Sparks. It is called The Starving Roamer. The next morning, after a breakfast of plums and coarse bread, they set out again. Maddie made Lena a place to sit in the back of the truck, between two of the crates. She took the blankets that she'd slept on and spread them on the rough floor of the truck. Lena could sit on the blankets, lean against the nearest crate, and dangle her legs over the truck's back edge. The burn still hurt this morning. It was reddish, angry-looking blister. After a while, as the sun came up, the sweet, grassy smell arose from the earth. Lena began to enjoy herself again. She watched the countryside fall away behind the truck. Stretches of brown gold grass as big as the sky, trees like hairy spikes, rocky slopes. And this was how it was for 4 more days. At night, they would find a place by a stream to sleep, if they could find a stream. They passed the other ox-pulled carts and trucks on their way, both going their direction and coming back. They would stop and talk with these roamers and sometimes trade food with them. Caspar always asked if they'd been to the city. Very few of them had. The ones that had been there just shook their heads when Caspar asked if they found anything interesting. "It's a waste of time to go there," they said. "Don't bother." Most of the roamers they had met had been scavenging in what they called the suburbs, which Lena understood to mean towns that lay around the city. Caspar and Maddie hardly spoke to her at all during the day. Around noon, they would stop the truck and get something to eat from the chest of provisions they had brought. At first, there was dried fruit, but soon that was used up. After that, it was traveler's cake, morning, noon, and night. Caspar always went to sleep right after he'd filled his belly. He lay on the ground and snored. Then Maddie would beckon Lena with a tilt of her head, and they would walk away from Caspar and find a place to sit, often beneath a tree, one of those trees that spread their branches out like a big top of a mushroom. They would sit in the soft grass and look at the sky through the branches. Sometimes a breeze swept across the land and brought them the scent of dusty earth and dry weeds. After lunch on the second day of traveling, Lena asked Maddie where she came from. "A horrible place," was all she said. "Horrible in what way?" "Small, cold, and poor. Houses made of old boards. Bad soil for growing things, never enough food, a place that was withering." "What does that mean, withering?" Lena asked. "It means shrinking and dying. Things were getting worse there. There was too much sickness, too much hunger, too much unhappiness. People were always quarreling, and a lot of them were leaving. It was ending, the place where I came from. I wanted to be somewhere that was beginning." "Our city was ending too," said Lena. She looked up at the blue sky and thought about the sky in Ember. Utter blackness, not a speck of light. No light shone anywhere in Ember now. There's no one left in our city," she said. "Sparks is a place that's beginning," said Maddie, "if it can get past the hard spots." "Hard spots?" "Yes, like suddenly having to take in 400 people." "Oh," said Lena, remembering the conflict in the village and all the reasons she'd wanted to get away from there. Her heart sank. "Maybe by the time we get back, that will all be over, all that trouble." "Maybe," said Maddie. "I hope so. Sparks is a whole lot better than where I came from." "I can understand why you wanted to leave that place," said Lena. "Pretty badly. Bad enough to take up with a fool." "Fool?" Maddie tipped her head towards the sleeping Caspar. "You came with him just to get away?" Lena whispered. Maddie nodded. "Roamers hardly ever came to our little settlement," she said, "mainly because we had nothing to trade. Caspar was only the second one I'd ever seen. I thought I might never see another, so I grabbed the chance." "Why couldn't you just leave by yourself?" "I thought of it," said Maddie, "but I didn't know where to go. I didn't know the roads or where the settlements were. I didn't know how I'd get food. I guess I wasn't bold enough to go alone." "When you got to Sparks, you could have stayed there," Lena said. "You didn't have to keep traveling." "I would have stayed," said Maddie, "if I hadn't promised to help him on his quest. I try to honor my promises, if I possibly can." That afternoon, as they traveled on across the rolling hills, Lena thought about places that were ending and places that were beginning. She knew about endings. Now she wanted to be part of a beginning. Maybe the people of Ember could begin again in the city. If not, well, she'd have to think about what else she could do. On the second night, they pulled up beside the ruins of a town. Not much was left of it, but you could see that there had once been hundreds of houses. The concrete foundations, overgrown weeds, lined up along the curved streets. Here and there, a wall or a chimney was still standing. Caspar stopped the truck just behind the outer row of ruins, and Maddie went around to the back and opened the trunk that held her dwindling supply of food. They had stopped beside a ditch where a trickle of water ran. It was green, scummy water, but Lena drank it anyway. It was all there was. Caspar seemed especially grumpy. His pink face was splotched and damp, and his eyes looked inflamed. He had forgotten to twist his mustache into points, and it hung down at the corners of his mouth. He dug a crumbling traveler's cake from the trunk and glowered at Maddie. "What's the matter with you anyway?" he said. "You haven't been very chatty lately." "I'm never chatty," said Maddie calmly. Caspar took a savage bite of his cake. "It's like traveling with a tree stump," he said. "I thought you were going to be pleasant and helpful." Maddie didn't reply to this. She chewed serenely, gazing out over the fallen houses. Lena realized there was a certain beauty in Maddie that she hadn't seen before. Her back was straight, she held her head high, and there was something unswayable in her. The bones of her face were so strong, and her gaze was firm. There was nothing fluttery about her. You could see that Caspar was finding out that she was not what he had taken her for at first. She was more than he had bargained for. On the third day, near evening, they saw a truck coming towards them from a great distance. They were on a long, straight road with a few trees or buildings to block their view. Just as the dry brown grass and a few ancient fences leaning over and... Let me repeat that sentence. They were on a long, straight road with a few trees or buildings to block their view. Just the dry brown grass and a few ancient fences leaning over, and flocks of birds rising, swooping through the air, and fluttering down again. Up ahead came the dark dot toiling towards them. In 20 minutes or so, the two trucks drew near. Lena stood behind Caspar and Maddie, looking forward. This roamer looked poor. He only had one ox, a shaggy, sway-backed animal, and on his truck there were only 2 crates, not 4 as on Caspar's. The man himself was almost as shaggy as his ox. His hair was long, and his beard lay like a brown hairy bib against his chest. As he came closer, he stood up on his truck and shaded his eyes with his hands, peering at them. "Watch out for this one," said Caspar. "Could be a bandit. Looks bad and mean and dangerous." When the other truck was about 30 or 40 feet away, its driver suddenly hauled on the traces. His ox veered, and the truck turned sideways so that it blocked the road. Lena couldn't tell if he'd done it on purpose. His movements were jerky, as if something were wrong with him. He climbed down from his truck and stood in front of it, his neck tucked down and his shoulders hunched as high as his ears. His eyes glittered in the hairy face. He stood like that, saying nothing, waiting for them. Caspar stopped the truck. He stood up and leaned forward. "Get out of my way, you ragged wretch! Move that flea-bitten rig!" The roamer came a few paces closer. His mouth opened, a hole in the tangle of beard, but no words came out. Lena could see the back of Caspar's neck flush deep red. "I said, get out of my way!" He snatched up his whip and sent the long lash curling out towards the man and snapped it a few feet from his face. The roamer let out a howl. He lurched towards them. All of this happened in only a minute or so. Lena's heart was beating wildly. Was this a bandit? Was he going to attack him? She ducked down behind the crate and peered out between the slats. Caspar raised the whip again. "Come any closer and I'll cut you to shreds," he shouted. But before he could lash out, Maddie grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said. Caspar tried to shake her off, but she yanked at him so hard that he lost his balance and sat down again. "Why not find out what the man wants before you attack him?" she said. Caspar struggled against her, but she was strong. She managed to wrench the whip out of his hand, and she dumped down and confronted the other roamer, who had halted just in front of the truck. "What do you want from us?" she said to him. standing squarely in his path, her hands on her hips. "Why have you stopped us like this?" The roamer backed up a step. He looked up at her with his mouth hanging open. He was grubby, Lena saw. His hands and his bare feet were nearly black with dirt. He mumbled something. Maddie bent closer to him. "What?" He mumbled again. She turned to Casper, who had climbed down from the truck and who was approaching with his fists clenched. "He says he's out of cakes." She turned back to the man. "How long has it been since you've eaten?" The man stared at his hands. He had long, filthy fingernails. His fingers twitched. 3 days, he croaked. "Just crumbs, 3 days. "Well," said Casper, if we're going to supply you with food, you're very mistaken." "Surely we can spare a couple of cakes," Maddie said. Casper's face was dark red. "We cannot," he said. "We are on a special mission, extremely important. We need that food for ourselves, all of it." Lena thought this was unreasonable. "He can have one of mine," she said. Casper whipped around. "No," he said. "You're going to need your strength." "You're being ridiculous," said Maddie, but Casper reached out and pushed her back into the truck. "And you," turning to the roamer, "get your truck out of my way if you want to stay alive." From the roamer came a sound Lena had never heard before. A hoarse hissing sound, as if he were spitting a stream of fire straight into Casper's face. He did this twice, and then he turned away and scuttled back to his truck. He pulled on the ox's traces and moved it a few feet along, just far enough for Casper to drive his truck past it. Casper yelled at him one more time as he passed. "You shouldn't be a roamer if you can't feed yourself." He cracked his whip at the man and drove on. Lena climbed into the crate and sat with her head on her knees for a while. She was horrified by the starving roamer. How did he come to be in such a state? Was it his own fault? Was he going crazy? But Casper could have given him something, couldn't he? Or were they so low on food that losing any of it would really harm them? Her stomach lurched. She felt queasy, but she didn't know if it was hunger or horror at what she'd just seen. That night, Lena woke up for a moment and heard the oxen making an unsettled noise. She heard a creaking too, but the sound stopped and she went back to sleep. In the morning, Maddie discovered they had been robbed. "Well, well," she said, opening the food chest. "Look here." "What?" said Casper, who was wetting his mustache with spit and twisting it into points. "Someone's been in our food," said Maddie. "I wonder who." Casper jumped to his feet. "Into our food?" "He didn't get much," Maddie said. "Just 3 or 4, I'd guess." She put her hand in the chest and felt around. "But he left us something." Sputtering with rage, Casper hauled himself up into the truck. When he looked into the food chest, he let out a string of furious words. Lena crept out from under the blanket and stood up. "What is it?" she said. "What happened?" "Our friend from yesterday has been here for a visit," said Maddie. "We wouldn't give him what he wanted, so he took it and left something for us." "Left what?" said Lena. Casper was shaking with fury. His face was dark red. "Looks like dirt," said Maddie. "I think he took what he wanted and dumped a bag of dirt on the rest." She wrinkled her nose. "Might be some ox droppings in there, too." "The skunk!" Casper cried. "The miserable rat!" "In my opinion," said Maddie, "you should have given him a couple of cakes in the first place." "I didn't ask for your opinion," said Casper. "You're going to get it anyway," said Maddie, suddenly fierce. "You turned an old guy into an enemy in less than 2 minutes. You did it. You've done it over and over again. I've seen you. You approach people like an enemy and bam, they turn into one, whether they were to begin with or not. It's my policy to be ready to defend myself," Casper said, scowling. "At any moment." "Fine," said Maddie. "So now, because of your policy, we're out of 4 cakes instead of 2, and we have a lot of dirt on the rest." She closed the chest, stood up, and glared at Casper with a mixture of rage and scorn. "If you ask me, making friends is a better defense than making enemies." "I didn't ask you," said Casper. On the 4th day, they went uphill hour after hour. The heat was terrible. The only water they found was at the bottom of a deep ravine. All of them scrambled down, half stepping, half sliding, carrying Casper's biggest pots, and sweating and gasping, they lugged the filled pots back up so that the oxen could drink. Then they went uphill some more. It was late afternoon by the time they came to the top of the ridge. Lena was so tired by that time and so hot she felt like a boiled vegetable, limp and runny. She was a bit dazed too, only half awake, and so she was startled when the truck jolted to a stop and she heard sharp exclamations from Casper and Maddie. She jumped down and went around to the front. A tremendous view of land and water lay before her. Such immense water she had never seen. Green-blue, glinting in the rays of the late sun, white ripples racing across its surface. To her right, it stretched as far as she could see, but straight ahead she could see the shore of the other side. Green trees covering the ground and hills rising beyond it. "The bay," said Casper. "This means we're almost there. We go around the end of it and then north." "When do we get to the city?" Lena asked. "Tomorrow," said Casper. His wide face broke into a grin, and he laughed his high, weird laugh. He opened and closed his fingers, stretching and gripping as if he were imagining taking a hold of something. "Tomorrow we'll be there, and then our work begins." End of chapter 16.